Hello friends, it's Liz from Elizabeth Street Studio, and I am here with the first podcast of a brand new year. I don't know about you, but I feel like the shiny new feeling from January, from starting a new year, has kind of worn off. And like it's not so exciting anymore, and it's cold and it's winter, and I feel like this is the hardest part of you've already started something new, and now you're like, okay, now it's the boring, like, stick with it and do the hard work part. Just that's the vibe that I have in, what is it, we're going into the third week of January already. Yeah, so I thought this would be a good time to do a new podcast episode, but instead of showing you what I'm working on, because there are a few things I'm hoping I can finish up. Like, everything is taking a little bit longer than I thought, but that's okay. So instead of showing you some new things, I wanted to do a special episode chatting about finding inspiration and how to keep your inspiration pure, how to find like an authenticity in your designs so that you can avoid copying as much as possible. And then once you have all those ideas, I wanted to share one of my favorite new tools for organizing your workflow when it comes to knitwear. This is actually a tool. It's called Trello. I don't know if you've heard of it. There was a podcast from a fine artist that I follow. Her name is Laura Horn. She did a whole episode of this, I think at the beginning of 2021, about how she uses this to kind of help her like lay out ideas for the year and how she kind of flows through. And I actually started using this tool in my full-time day job. I am actually a librarian in real life. I knit in real life too, but you know what I mean. My full-time day job is at a local public library, and the team that I work on, we've started using Trello this year, and like I've become kind of obsessed with it to the point where they a little bit make fun of me. But I love this tool so much, and it works so well for knitwear design and for keeping track of things you have different things at different points, and you kind of want to keep that cycle moving wherever you are. So I found it really helpful. So I thought that would be a fun thing to share. I love getting an inside look into how other designers and artists work and what their workflow looks like, and I think that's really fun. So I thought that'd be a fun way to start the year, just chatting about how to find inspiration, especially if you feel like you're kind of in a rut. I feel like I go through periods where I have a ton of inspiration and like I don't even know what to do with it all. I don't even know where to focus. And then other times where it's like I'm bored with everything. I think that like knowing that and knowing that you're normal for going through different cycles like that is also helpful. Doesn't mean you're like a bad artist or that you're, I don't know, that something is off. I find a lot of times if I'm not feeling really into it, it's literally because I'm just tired, or like my brain is tired, just with everything going on in the world right now. And there's been a lot of changes like in my day job, things going on there, so like that's taken a lot of energy. And so then again, that's where your workflow and your organization can help you. If you have a system for keeping track of your inspiration, if you have some go-to places to go to, I think inspiration can be more like a muscle that you train, so that you practice it and like you can depend on it, and you're not sitting around waiting for that next spark. Like, you're ready when that next spark comes, but you have a system in place and you can come up with good work even when you're not feeling it. Does that make sense? Anyway, so I found all those things just to be really helpful to think through, and to even just to voice to other friends, even if they're not knitwear designers or not artists, and listening to other artists talk about this, whether it's authenticity, how to kind of manage that creative cycle, and how to still show up even if you don't feel like it, because showing up like feeds something in you. Like if you're a creative, if you're an artist, like there's something in you that doesn't feel right if you're not making or creating. Do you know what I mean? And so how to show up even when if that's harder to do, like you can, like your heart still needs that. Your heart still needs that act of creating to feel like itself. So I'm hoping this will be interesting and maybe some food for thought. Maybe you've had similar experiences, or you have your own kind of systems. I'd love to hear ways that you've found to stay in that rhythm, even if it doesn't feel effortless. It's the best when it does feel effortless, though. That's the best feeling, when it's just like, it is just flowing and you know, like, yes, this is it, this is good. But it's not always like that. So yeah, so I'm gonna jump in. Actually, I have my computer's on behind me and I have notes back there. I'm so nerdy, you guys. I wrote down the notes for this and I was like, oh, this would be such a great podcast. But it literally took me like 6 months to actually sit down and like talk about it. Oh well, but here we are, we're finally here. But so in thinking about inspiration and how to kind of avoid copying, how to find the authenticity that your voice specifically. I like to think of knitting like music. I don't know if you've ever been a part of like, in high school, your high school band, or, whatever, like a choir or something. But I like to think of knitting like music. Like we all start with the same notes. We start with the same basic stitches, a knit stitch and a purl stitch. They're the same no matter where you are in the world. Like a quarter note and a half note are the same no matter where in the world or what language you speak. It's kind of a universal language. We start with the same notes, but we all have really specific ways and really unique ways of putting them together, combining them. So I think since we all start with that same kind of universal language, I think it's probably inevitable that at some point we end up copying unintentionally. It might not be like an exact one-for-one copy, but it might be really similar to something else that you see. You put out a design, you're like, oh, that looks really similar. But I think if you practice keeping your inspiration really pure and you create out of a place of integrity and out of that unique place that's you, I think you can move forward with confidence and with grace. I think if you start and you're worried about, oh my gosh, I'm gonna make something, what if it looks just like somebody else's? Like you have to browse the millions of patterns on Ravelry to make sure that your design isn't copying anybody. I think that's not a great place to start from. I think it's kind of based out of fear, and I don't think you can make your best work when you're basing that out of a place of fear. So I think if you practice keeping your inspiration really pure and then, move forward with grace and integrity, you can deal with, any, if it's too similar, you can deal with that when that comes, because you can go back and change your design, whatever. You can deal with that as it comes and then find a way to move forward that is not copying someone else. I think there was I don't remember when last year this happened. It was probably a long time ago now. But I think I saw this happen just on social media with, I think it was a designer, her name is Alicia Paulson. She had made this like beautiful cardigan design, and it was actually really, really similar to a design that had just been published, like probably like a week or two before. I think it was Andrea Mulry of Dre Renee Knits. I think it was really, really similar to something she had just published. And she like was just straight up about it. She's like, guys, I can't publish this. Like I didn't realize, someone told me, and like I didn't realize, and it's just too close. They were creating totally separately, but we used the same stitches, the same, it's inevitable again at some point that something like that's going to happen, and I think it does a lot. But I thought she handled it so well, and I thought it was such a great example of how to handle that with integrity as a designer. So she was like, I'm not going to publish this, you know what, I'm going to rework this, and do something else with it. And that's what she did, and it was like turned out to be this really cool thing. I think she like did polls with her Instagram audience and was like, okay, do we want pockets or no pockets? Do we want like how long do we want it, or what type of sleeves? And it turned out to be this like community thing that turned out to be really cool. And I thought it was just such a great example of how to handle that with grace, and not just be like totally mad that like you can't publish this after you put tons and tons of work into it. So I loved that, and I was like, that was so great. Like that was just, it stuck with me even after this long. You know how fast the social media world goes. But it stuck with me enough that I wrote it down because I wanted to talk about it. And I think that example was not only an example of a really great way to handle a situation like that with grace, but it was also, I think, a good example of a mindset shift that needs to happen if you are going from a consumer to a creator, or like a designer and an artist. Like if you make the choice to go from one to the other, I think there's a responsibility inherent in that, and that responsibility is to find how to keep your inspiration pure, and to again start with that foundation that's not out of fear, but out of, I know my inspiration and I know my process, and I try to keep that really pure, and I can move forward confidently, because I know where I started from. Like I didn't start by looking at all this stuff looking at all these other patterns on social media. So I know that they're not going to be in my brain. I know that it's not going to be copying them intentionally. There might be something unintentional that happens, but you've started from this place where you know what's going on, you know your process, and if you come up against that, you can deal with it, like the situation with Alicia Paulson. You can deal with it with grace and, find a way to move forward. And I think that idea of thinking of yourself like a fine artist was really, really helpful for me this last year. Like I said, I mentioned Laura Horn earlier. I bought a couple of her, she has some abstract classes. And I bought one of her courses. She does a podcast, like she's done a podcast for a really long time. And she has some great conversations just about like that creative flow, finding inspiration. And then the other artist, Emily Jeffords is her name. She's a painter, and she has a really great podcast series about copying, how not to copy, how to deal with it if it happens. And she's coming at this from more of the fine art standpoint, but I think it's so helpful. I think knitting especially can be, think of it like as a handcraft, or a something like hobbyish. Like it can have a different, I don't want to say, do you know what I mean? Like it can have a different like connotation than a like fine art, like painting or drawing. But I think knitwear design can be as much or more of a fine art than anything else like you would go to art school for. I mean, you need so many different skills to be a successful knitwear designer. Like you need to be able to think analytically and mathematically, but then also you need the design and aesthetic sensibilities. It's such a rounded field. I think it's so interesting. Well, it's part of why I like it, is because it just like gets different parts of my brain working, and I love it so much. But anyway, for whatever reason, I don't think knitting is thought of as a fine art, but whatever, it should be. We are artists. If you are a knitwear designer, you are an artist. And I think even knitters, just knitting it yourselves, like that is an art in and of itself too. So I think knitting or thinking of yourself, if you're a knitwear, especially if you're a knitwear designer, also if you're a knitter, thinking of yourself as a fine artist is a really good way to frame up and think about where you get your inspiration from and how you collect it or keep track of it, that I think can be really foundational with the work that you put out. And some of the ways, so that said, I'm going to share some of the ways that I do that I have found to be really, really helpful. Sometimes I know a lot of knitters and a lot of artists get inspiration from the natural world. It's like going outside, going for walks. I love doing that. And I feel like I always come up with something. There's always something, some little thought floating in my head after I've gone for a walk that I have to either write down. I get inspiration from the outside world, like the natural world. I get inspiration from ready to knit garments. I think that's an easy one. But I don't try to take it as like I'm recreating a straight up making a hand knit copy of a ready to wear garment. And I do this a lot. This is a lot from Pinterest and from stuff I buy for my own wardrobe. But I try to narrow it down or like break it apart into certain elements. Like what is it specifically that is really attractive, or what is it that's really jumping out at me that I like? Is it the colors? Is it the shape of the garment? Is it like a neckline? Is it some funky little detail? And then how can I take that element and then translate it and rework it into something that I can use in a knitwear pattern? So I'm never taking something and just trying to make a copy of it. Like that might be good if you're trying to like learn specifics of like garment construction or something like that. But when I'm creating a pattern for myself or like doing my own design, I never try to just do like a one-for-one copy. I always try to pick it apart and try to narrow down what is really sticking out to me, that I want to try and use in my own work. And that's where that mindset of thinking like a fine artist comes into play. You want to look at the work without copying it. You want to be inspired by it. You don't want to copy it. How can you be inspired without copying it? So yeah, thinking of yourself like a fine artist and taking things apart. How can you break it down? So that's probably social media and Pinterest is often where I find the ready to wear ideas. But I try to be really careful when it comes to Pinterest and social media. I mean, I'm on probably Instagram the most. Instagram and Pinterest probably. And I try to be so careful on there. Well, Pinterest specific, I deal with them a little bit differently. So Pinterest, I have a personal Pinterest board where I like pin anything and everything that I think is interesting. I have a like fiber inspiration board, which is like ready to wear things. And I'm like, ooh, that's a really cool shape, or that looks so cozy. And I don't think about it too much. I just like pin it. But the one thing I try not to pin at all on that board is other knitting patterns and other patterns designed by other knitwear designers. Like I try never to do that, because again, if I see something from another knitwear designer, I mean, that's gonna subconsciously be stuck in my head while I'm like flipping through a Stitch dictionary, or like I feel like that's just getting too close to influencing my work, and I don't want to do that. I want to keep it really pure. I suppose you could argue that ready to knitwear is maybe doing that a little bit, but I try never to pin. I have a specific board for knitting patterns that I want to knit someday. Like, so I have a totally separate place for that. Like, that is the like fun consumer side in my free time. Like, that goes into a different place, and then I don't look at it again. If I'm looking for ideas as a designer, like my designer hat is on and I am thinking like a fine artist. I'm not pinning other knitting patterns that have been written and published by other designers. I mean, and that's not to say you can't be inspired by other designers. I mean, there's kind of a different way that I go about that with Instagram, but when you're specifically looking for ideas for a project, I don't want to be that influenced by other designers, so that I'm not somehow taking something and copying. And I think by not doing that, it'll just be that much more unique and original to you, to me as a designer, or to you as if you're the designer. You know, it'll be more unique, and I think it'll be better for it. But yeah, so for Pinterest, I have like a fiber inspiration board where I pin like ready to wear garments or things like that I'm like, I would wear that. That looks really cozy, and I feel like part of this I could use, or, you know, things that have elements that really stick out to me. So I do use Pinterest that way. That's probably the most way. And then I have just started an Elizabeth Street Studio Pinterest account. So like, I don't want all of my other personal things in there, because like I've been on Pinterest like since it was like the beta, you know, when you had to like request an invite to do it. So I've been on it for a really long time. So like there's some really old stuff that like I probably am like, why is this on here? It's like, I just don't want that on like my, like if it's a business one, I don't really want it on there. So I've started an Elizabeth Street Studio one, and you can like make reels on Pinterest now. Did you realize that? I was like, what? So I feel like there's just way more, there's a lot of other ways to engage on Pinterest that are like business specific and creative specific than there used to be. So I kind of just wanted a little bit of a fresh start. So I have to start exploring that a little bit more. But yeah, so Pinterest, I do find a lot of inspiration from like ready to wear, even some like machine knit, like, but like they're knitwear garments like produced by clothing companies. Do you know what I mean? Even some of those types of things, like the shape of a cardigan or that type of thing, I've saved for those reasons. But so Pinterest, I love it. It's really helpful. It's also really great if you like making mood boards. If you inspired by the natural world, and you want something, you know, like woodland inspired or winter. Like, I love doing things seasonally because we have very distinct seasons in Wisconsin. Well, maybe spring. We don't really have a spring. There's not much of spring. Spring doesn't last very long, if it exists at all, really. But anyway, you know, seasonal cycles, I really love that, and how to incorporate those ideas. So if you want just like general imagery for a mood board, it's a really great place to look. And then, okay, so Instagram, I think, so Instagram, I do follow other knitwear designers on my Instagram account. I try not to look at Instagram period too much when I am sitting down to like work on a design. I try not to look at Instagram at all. I like put my phone away. And I think if you're gonna follow other knitwear designers, I find it really, really helpful to find designers that you enjoy looking at their work, but it's maybe a little bit different than what you're creating, or just other like fine artists. I love following painters and illustrators. I get so much joy from that, and because I also like to knit, or I do like to knit, but I like to draw and paint as well, just playing around. And so following artists that work in a different medium than you, and I also think following knitwear designers that inspire you, but that maybe have a little bit of a different style than you do, or a different vibe. That can be really helpful in keeping you away from that copying, if that makes sense. So I try to be really, just really aware of what I'm looking at, and really intentionally putting my phone away and not looking at any social media when I'm specifically sitting down to work on a design. So yeah, social media is such a love-hate, because it's such a great way that's free for the most part and sharing your work, but I feel like you have to be really intentional and careful with it, especially if you're trying to create original work. So those are kind of like my thoughts. That's kind of my philosophy with how I deal with social media. And of course, I'm not always perfect, goodness knows. But I found that thinking of it in that way has been super helpful for me. Then a couple of ways not on Pinterest or social media that I keep track of ideas are, I have a couple of notebooks. So sometimes I will, like, an idea will like pop into my head and it is fully formed. Like, I'm like, that's it, I need to make that. But other times so when that happens, I don't know if you've heard of this kind of notebook. It's called the Fashionary. And it has like little outlines of like a body shape. What is the word for that? Croquis? It's a really funny word. But I don't even know if you can tell on the screen. Kind of, it's like these really, really light dots that are outlining like a human shape or human form. And so then you can draw on top of it, and it's like, you know, a sweater that actually looks like a sweater and not just like a weird box. So I've had this one for a while, like, and when I was in my like sewing phase, I even clipped some like little fabric samples there. I haven't done much sewing for a long time. So I would like plan out outfits of like, these are other patterns. So I was like, ooh, this would look really good with this, and this would look good with this. I didn't actually make all of that, but it was really fun to play around with. But this is a fun way just to like if there's something that pops into your head that it's like fully formed and you know exactly what you want it to look like, you can get it down and get the basics down without having to worry if things are like, oh, this is not proportional, or this will not make sense when I come back to it. So I like, because it has little outlines on it, that's really, really helpful. There aren't different sizes of outlines though. Like it's a skinny outline. I'm like, ooh, ah. So I feel like there's a web somewhere where you can do it so that it's like your size of a croquis outline. I can't remember what it's called. You might have to pay for it though. I don't know. But anyway, if you don't want the like one size that's pretty skinny, you can do like I know there's some place online you can do a life size one, but this works well enough for me to just kind of get the idea down, and then so that I don't forget it, and then I come back to this and I'll like flip through and it's like, oh yeah, there's that. Oh, that's a good idea. I should work on that next. But yeah, so the Fashionary is a really fun notebook. And then I just have another plain old notebook. I keep a list of names. I love collecting cool names. Sometimes it's like the name of a plant or a flower. Sometimes maybe a city or a street name. So like driving around, you see a cool street name. I'll see, what else? Like literally at like anywhere, stuff will just like pop into my head. I'm like, oh, that'd be a great name for a pattern. And I don't necessarily know what it'll be, but I think it's a really fun exercise to find a cool name and then be like, okay, well, what does that, when you think of that word or that phrase, what does it kind of conjure up in your mind? Is it something really soft and fuzzy? Is it something really like boxy? Is it like, what kind of garment or what kind of shawl, garment, accessory would that name fit with? Whether it's the color, the shape, the stitch pattern. I think it's a really fun way to keep it fresh and original. Names of spices. Well, if you follow any of my knitting patterns, names of spices, like I have a cinnamon hat and I'm working on a ginger sweater. Like what would, there was a sweater that was called ginger, what would it look like? Well, it would be kind of like a rusty red color. I think it would be really cozy and comfy. Like, what does that, it's a really fun exercise for me that I love doing. And that's probably one of my favorite ways. I'm working on a summer shawl collection, and I've been like collecting these really fun names for summery shawls, which is really fun to do in the winter when it's like 10 degrees outside. I'm done with winter already, you guys. Anyway, but like one of the names I wanted to use for this collection came from my favorite tea at the grocery store. Like, you just never know. So I keep a running list of cool names of like, let's see what else, like really basic sketches. I'll also sometimes write down stitch patterns. So that's another, I love using stitch dictionaries too. So keep a list of cool names. That's a good way to try things out. It's like it's right there. I'm afraid I'm gonna knock everything over. Can you see? It's right there. That one's my favorite right there. It's the Japanese Knitting Stitch Bible by Hitomi Shida. And I think there's a second one as well. Those are some of my absolute favorite stitch dictionaries. I love using those when I'm working on a new design. They're really, really intricate. I don't know if you've ever looked at them. You can get them on Amazon. Also, check your local library, because we have this one at the library where I work, which is really cool. So if you haven't, check that out. And the way I like to use something from a stitch dictionary, you know, I'll find stitches on, you can find stitches on Pinterest too, and sometimes I'll use those straight up because that's what they're there for. Like, I don't consider that's not copying, because it's meant to be, it's there as a resource for designers. So I think you're totally good doing that. So I'll sometimes find things on Pinterest, but my favorite way is to like go through a book like the Japanese Knit Stitch Bible and pick something. I find something that they're all pretty intricate, and some of them you're working either the lace or the cabling on both the front and the back side, when a lot of times, or at least in the patterns that I've knit, you work the lace pattern, whatever, on the front side, and then the back side, you're just working straight across to resolve all those stitches. But these are super intricate, and a lot of times you're working the pattern on both the front side and the back side. So either I'll find something that looks interesting, and then I will take out the pattern, or like do not like stretch out the pattern so that you're only working it on the front side, and that will usually lengthen it and give it a really different look. I did that with, I think I did that with my iris hat pattern that I published earlier this year. I don't have the sample, I'm sitting right here. I'm pretty sure that was, maybe it was from Pinterest. Oh gosh, I can't remember now. But anyway, I did that with wherever that stitch pattern came from. It was originally shorter because it was worked, you didn't have that resolving wrong side row. So I will do that. A lot of times I take elements out and like simplify way down into like one type of motif. A lot of times they'll have like little cables, or if you have like a cable, you'll have like a little decorative stitch like inside the cables. Do you know what I mean? So I'll take out some of those extra elements and just use like a single part of the stitch pattern. I also like to maybe combine, especially if you have a shawl, actually, like this one. This is Fiore, by the way, which I published earlier this year. I also like to, you have a main motif, and then is there a way you can only use like half of it or part of it? Like this one, if you see, you have this, the diamonds, and you have kind of the chevron. Well, the chevron is the top half of the diamonds. Like, is there a way you can just repeat one single part of it to get a totally different look? I love doing that. I also like thinking about changing the scale of something by changing the yarn weight that you're using. Like if you knit, like this is knitted fingering weight, but what would this look like if you knit it in a worsted weight? It would probably look really cool. Like maybe not for a whole shawl or a sweater, but maybe a cowl, or, you know, changing the scale of something can really change the vibe a lot, and without totally changing what's going on. So those are a couple of little tricks. I'm no expert, but there are a couple of little tricks that I like when I'm using Stitch Dictionary, so that maybe I'm not just taking something straight out of one and putting it on the pattern. But I mean, you totally can, and I totally have. I like finding different stitches and then combining them into one pattern. That makes it feel different. And then with your yarn choice and your gauge and everything, you are, you know, that's something that's unique as well. Another way to make it unique. But yeah, those are some tricks that I like with using Stitch Dictionaries to keep it nice and fresh and to keep your inspiration pure, like we're talking about. Let's see. I feel like there was one other thing I was gonna chat about. Oh, I was gonna show you Trello. And I actually might have to stop the recording to do that. Let me just double check my notes. Yeah, I think that was pretty much my list of things that I was gonna chat about. So let me pop over to my computer, and I'm gonna show you how I use Trello to keep track of all of those ideas when you have your notebooks and you have your Stitch Dictionaries, how to actually get your ideas down into like a workable system so that when you're working on, you can keep track of your flow, your design flow, and what that looks like. So let's hop over to Trello and take a look. This is what this program looks like. You have a lot of options for customizing, but the main part is you have boards. Like this whole thing is a board, this whole screen that you're seeing. This is a list, pattern ideas is a list, in progress, test knitting, those are all lists. And then you have cards on your lists. So it's like there's a lot of parts, but it makes sense while you're actually using it. And you can move cards between your lists, if that makes sense. And I think Trello was developed as kind of like a team tool, so you can share workspaces, you can share boards to make them with other users, but and you can also, there's, you know, you can see other boards here, and you get a certain number with a free account. But this one, I use this free board just myself, and this works like a charm for me. Like, it's taken a while to find something that works to keep track of all of this. Someplace where I can just dump ideas, but it's still organized. So this is the desktop version. There's also an app that looks literally exactly the same. It's just sized, you know, to your phone or your mobile device that you have. So the way I use this is I have on the farthest left column is ideas, and then as you move to the right, things get more finalized and things become real. And then the pattern catalog, I mean, you can see I don't have a ton. I only have 2 things in here because that's how long I've been using this, was maybe through part 6 to 8 months of last year, 2021. So as you move from start on the left side, as you move to the right, the patterns actually become real and they go through all the stages of development. And then further over, you can scroll, you can have an unlimited number. There's quite a lot of stuff on here. You can have an unlimited number of, I think, of lists, and then, you know, put however many cards in there. But so let's see, let's look at something that's already done. If you click on a card, you can do a ton of different things on a card. You can type in a description. You can add images as attachments. And if you so choose, you can make it a cover, which is why you see this lovely photo of the Wildermyths instead of just a blank text or blank background with text. You can add, so members is if you were collaborating, you could add another member if you invited them into your workspace and then gave them access to this specific board. You can do labels, so you can see Wildermyths ready to publish, because I just published it and I have a few other labels on here, but you can totally customize those. You can add due dates to things. If you want a start date and an end date, you can set reminders. I don't use the reminders a ton, but I just had a general date because that's the 17th was when these were published. Oops, nope, today is the 17th. Oh my gosh, tomorrow. Just kidding, the 10th. Oh my goodness, you guys, for real. There we go. I don't think I even had to do that on there. That's fine. Anyway, you can add a checklist and you can check things off of there. So you can hide checked items or show checked items. Actually, these things are done. You can see sometimes it's almost too detailed because I don't remember to come back in and finish everything. But anyway, so there's tons of ways that you can use all of the functions on the individual cards. So that's some examples of what you can do with cards. And the way that I've found this to be most helpful to me is starting with moving from ideas to in progress to test knitting to the final pattern has been published. Keeping track of marketing, I am very much still learning how to best market things and how to stand out when there's millions of patterns on Ravelry. But so, I have a list of basic things that I do, a checklist of posts. You can add links, all of that kind of thing. So that really helps me to remember, these are the things that I need to do. These are things I need to send my test knitters, make sure that's wrapped up, that they have things that I followed through and what I said I would for them. And then, that's done. If it's green, it's done. If I had not done something, you can see where your progress is if you are not quite done with everything. And I finished that, so it's complete. But again, I like you can see there's some ideas. Some of them have names. A drop shoulder cardigan. I think this might be my next project. My internet's being really slow. I love putting links into potential yarns to use. I actually have some yarn in my stash that I might end up using for this project. But anyway, so sometimes all it is a list of a title, a really basic description, and then potential yarns to use. But, if I was working on this, I would
move it over to in progress. So I want to open it. And then I would say, wait, where am I here? I'm in the sample knitting and pattern writing phase, and then I could add a much more detailed checklist, like you can see for the ginger sweater. These two things are kind of happening simultaneously. I have a link to my spreadsheet in case I, whatever, lose the link for whatever reason and I don't want to go dig for it. I know it's in there. I put some notes for both of the samples that I've been working on. And then you can tell actually we are really close to being able to check that off. So that's exciting. But you can kind of see how far you've come, some notes about, what you might want to change if you're working on, if you're on a certain version of the pattern. And then you can see the label, and you can see, kind of right off the bat what you have going on. And actually this, once I get this part done, let's just say that's done, and then I would be ready to move this over. And it is here. So you can tell exactly what's going on with what pattern depending on where it is in this process. And for me, that's really helpful, just to get things out of my brain into somewhere where I can see exactly what's going on kind of a bird's eye view of what's going on where. And then I also have, notes for, here are the podcast notes that we just talked about. So I had those ideas, so I quick wrote those down and saved those in here. Newsletter ideas, like a kind of formula. I'm not even sure what some of this is. And I don't use all of these, but again, it's just nice to have it all sorted out so you can just quickly go through it when you have time. One other really cool thing that you can do is make templates with your cards. So if you are going to get really specific and you're like, I want to know the yarn, if in the description of your pattern, you have your needle sizes, your measurements, you want all of that, you could make a template. So I just have a really, really simple one. You could make it as detailed as you want. And then when you're ready to add a new one, you can just click Create Card from Template, put in the pattern name. You can choose what list you want it under. So I'm going to keep this in the pattern ideas list, and then it'll just automatically create the card for you. So now you have all of this ready to be filled in, and then you can add images and links as you need without having to recreate this basic pattern card every single time. I think that's a really fun feature. Yeah, I think that's kind of the basics of Trello. But I mean, if you have questions, you can let me know. But again, this account was free. I think you can have unlimited lists and cards. I think you can only have so many boards with a free account. But this has been so helpful for me, and I love, it's like a sense of accomplishment when you can check something off and feel like you're moving forward, even if there maybe isn't a lot of physical progress that you can hold in your hands yet, especially if you're in the pattern writing, tech editing phase. But yeah, so that is how I use Trello to organize all of my ideas for knitwear design. I hope you found that helpful and enjoyable.